Hi everyone, this is week 3, Wednesday, April 8th of QTalk Live. I am QFom Gray, as if you didn't already know that. Joined with me by Andy Gray, who's in my ear talking to me to show me all your posts, or I'm sorry, to tell me about all your posts because I can't scroll through. Anyway, so today is demo day, and we're going to talk about soldering. Uh, Everything you need to know about soldering or want to know. I've had a lot of people querying regarding what a solder station is and the different types of solder and when to use it and the different soldering techniques. So just to let you know, if you're get lost along the way, we have all this information in my latest book, Minimal Metal Jewelry, or if you have the first book, Hot and Cold Jewelry Connections, that all these things are also discussed there. So you can definitely look at as a reference in those books, and those books are available also on our website. A lot of the things that I'm discussing today, the tools and whatnot, will also be available on the website and in the description here. I've added a whole bunch of links for you to make it a little bit easy to go back and refer to it, and so that uh, it will make it just easy. Anyway, so regarding soldering, one of the questions I get a lot is how do you set up your solder station and what kind of surfaces can you use and that kind of stuff. Well, not everybody has a studio like I do where it's a permanent workspace, but there are a lot of things that you can do. So I wanted to show you really quickly my workspace so that you get an idea of how you can get around it or how you can work with it to make it a little bit more mobile. So if you look behind me over there, so this is my workbench, right? I have my pickle pot here and I have all my tweezers and things over here, but I torch over here because my torch is right there. But what you see is about the work surface. This is a wood work surface, but yet I have fire bricks here because they're fire bricks, which means you can fire on them. What are fire bricks used for? They're used to make to line the inside of a fireplace. So it looks like this, and it looks like this when you're torching. And you can totally fire on this. You can use this as a firing surface, although there's a lot of heat sink and it takes a lot of heat to do that. However, one of the first things I do if I have a new fire brick like this is I would stick it in the oven or even just torch on it to get all the moisture out of it, and that will reduce a lot of the heat sink. And so you can buy however many you want. They're only a couple dollars, and you can get them at the local brickyard, believe it or not. And you can buy them in this color or a red color. Anyway, so you can buy as many as you want and buy it by the piece and then set up a surface space just like that. And what's nice about this is that you can just move it around. And it's heavy enough where you don't have to worry about it shifting on you when you're working. So that's a nice little solution that works well and easily and inexpensively. The problem for a lot of people is that it's heavy. So, another thing you can do too, and if you don't have a permanent workspace, what I would do is get one of these trays, like so. So this is just a cafeteria tray that was given to me by a friend, like, oh, maybe Q can use it. Sure. So I have a couple cafeteria trays. But anyway, you can use a cafeteria tray. You can go to the Goodwill and get some old cookie sheets would work too. And you can line this surface with those solder bricks. And now all of a sudden you have a mobile solder station where you can just pick it up and put it somewhere else, which is nice. If that is not an option for you, another option is to go with tiles that you can get at Home Depot. That's really easy, and again, it's just a few dollars and you can buy them. I would buy the cheapest one I can get my hands on. They're usually like maybe $2 or $3 for a 12-inch piece, and you just line your surface, and that's what you've been seeing since we have been that's what you've been seeing since we've been doing this. So actually, hold on. I feel like I have lost Andy. Oops. So sorry about that. He's yelling from upstairs, and I can't hear a thing. Okay, so looks like I got Andy back. Anyway, technical difficulties. So that's what you're going to want to do for a soldering surface. Another thing too is you want to be aware of the space that's in front of you when you're torching. So to make sure that there's nothing flammable in front of you, especially like an urban beater sign, which is usually not there when I'm torching. Anyway, okay, so that's a soldering surface, an easy way for you to set up. I'm going to move the camera down for a second here, and you can see in this quasi semi movable workspace that I have. So this here is just a tile from Home Depot. So you can definitely use something like that. The only difference here and the solder brick is that you cannot fire on this surface, although it will protect. It's nice to have it because it will protect your table, and you can set hot things on there. You just can't fire directly on there, and that's the advantage of the fire brick. If you want to go a very costly way, is you can also get solder boards and line your whole work surface with solder boards, but it's a little expensive. And if you're really handy, then you can go to Home Depot and buy yourself a like 4x4 sheet of hardy board. It comes in a couple thicknesses, and have somebody cut it down for you. That works also. And the hardy board you can solder on, although you have to be real careful about whether or not how much heat you're putting on there, because the heat will transfer to the table. Okay, so next, let's talk about all the items that make up a typical solder station. So, Andy, if you're talking to me, I can't hear you all of a sudden. Okay, so what you need for a regular solder setup, you need a torch of some sort. So this is a pistol torch. It goes right onto the can. These cans, it has to be specific. You have to have this collet for these torches to work, and then you just slip it right on. These are nice because it's a lot of heat, big torch, so big pieces. So it's really great. It's butane, and you don't have to refill. You just have to get a new canister. Then there's this, which I've been using for more than 10 years. These are great too because they're nice and portable. You also use butane with it. So those are the basic two torches. If you want to get into an acetylene torch or a propane torch, the investment is going to be far greater. It's going to be $200+ to get into that situation. Another thing is that people are sort of reluctant to use those bigger torches because of having propane tanks or acetylene tanks in their home, and they, if it depends on where you live too. Sometimes it's restrictive and you can't do that, so you need to check and you need to talk to your insurance company. But the reality is a lot of people are afraid of these tanks, and I'm going to make a quick argument here that propane tank is really no different than the propane tank that you're using on your barbecue. So it's, you might want to think about that. But those propane tanks or the acetylene torches, they're great. And if you are as privileged as I am, yay me, you can have natural gas piped in. And I had mentioned that the other day, that I have a natural gas pipe and piped in, and then I attached my torch to it over there, so I never have to refill the gas. I always have it on demand. So that's a torch. So you'll need a torch. You'll need fire tweezers of some sort. Okay, these are cross-locking. You can use the straight ones or the cross-locking ones. Doesn't matter, but what you need is you need to make sure that they have some sort of fire retardant, heat resistant grip on it, so that the heat doesn't transfer down the steel to your hands. So you'll need that. A tripod with mesh. Okay, so the tripod with mesh, I don't always use it, and a lot of times in these videos I'm not using it because the camera's too close. The tripod is 6 inches tall. My tripod's 6 inches tall. A lot of them are 9 inches tall, so it's definitely too close to the camera. And yeah, considering I'm on camera number 9, I really don't want to melt it yet. anyway, it's only the first 3 weeks. So maybe in a few weeks, I might be able to get another camera. We'll see. But you'll need a tripod. Again, a lot of times why do you use a tripod? So that you can heat from underneath a piece. Sometimes when you're like doing a bezel or bigger pieces, you need to get heat under it, and that's where a tripod comes into play. Okay, a solder board of some sort. Why a solder board versus a tripod? Because sometimes you have tiny little pieces that will fall through the grate. And yes, you can take that board and put it of the on top of the tripod if you want lifted away from your table. So it's a nice way to do that too. It's a nice extra use on the tripod. So you'll need a board at some point. You can, if you don't have a board, you can also use either a magnesia block or a charcoal block. We'll come back to that. You will need you'll need some solder. So we do solder paste in most of my classes because it's so much easier. But solder of any kind, silver solder of any kind, if we're doing silver solder, or whether it's wire or chip or sheet, and copper solder if you're doing copper. Okay, and then of course there's always brass solder. You'll need some pickle. You'll need some pickle. Pickle is basically sulfuric acid, something like 7% by volume. We usually sell it as Sparax. It's one of the most popular brands out there of pickle. So if you ever buy the solder kit, you're going to get this thing called Sparax, and that's actually your pickle. Pickle is basically an acid wash to remove fire scale from what you're soldering. So it helps clean the metal and prep it for soldering. Okay. There are alternatives to pickle. As far as sulfuric acid, you can use citric acid. People use vinegar and kosher salt, white vinegar and kosher salt. I personally think it stinks up the whole entire office, so I prefer to use my Sparax, because the other thing too is Sparax lasts a really long time. You'll also need a pickle pot for said pickle. So for me here, you can see, let's see where. I have a tiny little crock pot over there, and I've actually been able to acquire like 2 or 3 more from the Goodwill or Salvation Army, one of those thrift stores, for like $5. You can find them all the time, and but you can also get them at Target or Walmart. But you just need a little pickle pot. You want to use your pickle warm because it makes it happen faster. Otherwise, you're going to be sitting here for a while before it works. And like most people, I like things to process through while I'm working on a project. So that's what the pickle pot's all about. Just remember, the only thing that goes into pickle is silver, gold, brass, and copper. You never put in ferrous metals. Ferrous metals are like something with iron in it, like these tweezers. So then that's why you need a pair of copper tweezers. Okay, if you don't have copper tweezers and you're proficient with chopsticks, chopsticks will work too. Except chopsticks is a little hard for the little tiny pieces that, like the granules that fall inside. And then you will need, let's see, so you've got the pickle, you've got your solder. Oh, flux. Okay, so what is flux? I like to use the green brazing flux. This is what I was taught on, and really for most people who use flux, it's what you're taught on. And there's really no right or wrong here. Some people like the paste flux. I like this liquid flux. And what's the other one? Oh, I'm trying to think. It's the borax and denatured alcohol. You can do that too for a flux. I find that a little cumbersome. So not too long ago, probably about 5, 6 years ago, they started selling Flux in the spray bottle. And I think sprayers are great, but I feel like it gets all over the place. So here's a trick for you. I prefer to put my Flux in a dropper bottle. So I just put drops on it, and it's direct. It goes directly where I want it to go. And if you don't have a dropper bottle, you can save your like eye drop bottles. So like here I have an empty one. Anybody want it? I'll put in your order. But I save those for students too here and there, and I just share that with them. But you can just use that, put your flux in there, you can just drop it right onto your project. So there's another tip for you. So what else you got? So you have a torch, you have solder, you have flux, pickle, tripod, solder board, fire tweezers, and copper tongs. That's pretty much a basic solder setup. And then, of course, your work surface. But anybody can get that. Okay. So that said, let's talk a little bit more about work surfaces. Okay. So here you have a magnesia block. So magnesia blocks are great because there's very little heat sink, and when you're making granules, they have a tendency not to um, roll away, which is great. And what's the difference between a magnesia block and a charcoal block? Well, for me, I don't like to use charcoal in my workspace because I find it to be really dirty and I also find it to be expensive, but they could be used either way. Then you have a uh, pumice. So here I have a pumice bowl. So the pumice is great because again, there's very little heat sink if any, and it's reflective really, so it actually brings the heat back on your onto your piece so it stays hot. But what's nice is you can stick things in it and it'll stand. So that's what I like using the pumice for. And then there's also more gadgets like this, oops, the soldering station. So this is nice. You can put your solder board on it and you can turn your piece so you don't have to take your torch around. You can just turn this and keep your torch in one place. So that's really great. All these items can be found on our website and I have provided links there. I'm going to move this, oops, and I'm going to move this here. So all these things are available on the website if you are looking to make any purchases or don't have some of these items at home. Okay, so remember though, it's always about safety. So when you're working and you're soldering, you got to make sure that you work in a well ventilated area. If it is not a well ventilated area, you need to consider putting in a ventilation system of some sort. One of the keys to ventilation is to make sure that not only you have intake, but you have outtake. So you have to have the air circulating in and out. And that seems to be one of the things that people forget when they're working in this environment with ventilation is they think that they only need to take it out. Nope, you got to have some intake too. Oh, so if you have a fire extinguisher, it's probably a really good idea to keep around. You can probably buy it's just a small one from Home Depot. I know Costco even has smaller ones that you can purchase and keep nearby. That's a good thing to have just in case. Okay. So, I'm sorry. What is a what? Okay, so the question was, what is a soldering pick? So here I have a solder pick. A solder pick is something that is not necessarily required in a solder setup, but it's nice to have around because then you have an implement that helps you move things around just in case something rolls away, and it's nice and small, like if you have a little granule. Actually, I'm going to move the camera back up. I forgot. Let's talk about solder. Okay, so what are the rules of solder? This is important that you guys remember this, okay? So when you're soldering, let's recap really quick. First of all, what is solder? Solder is basically silver plus copper tin other. So solder is approximately 75% silver with a 25% copper tin other. Remember, fine silver is 99.9% silver. Sterling silver is 92.5% silver with a 7.5% copper tin other. Solder is approximately 75% silver with a 25% copper tin other. By having less of the silver and more of the alloy, the melting temp goes down so that when the solder flows, it does not melt your fine metals. That's what solder is. Okay, so a couple rules of solder that you always want to keep in mind is one, it has to be clean. So your metal pieces have to be clean. That's what the pickle is for. If you have things like oils or fire scale on there, then you need to remove it because it's a barrier to the solder, so it won't allow the two pieces to stick together. Okay, so if you have any of those things, you want to make sure that you stick it into the pickle first. And remember, when you're pickling, once you bring it out, you got to rinse it in some water, and then you can keep working. This so the I'm going to come back to the copper question. So the second rule is you need to make sure that the pieces are touching. Okay, the the bottom line with soldering is you really don't want to fill gaps with solder. It's not a great technique. You want to make sure that your pieces come together, like when you're making a ring. It makes for a better connection, it makes for a prettier connection, and it makes for a more professional project, more professional outcome. Okay, so you want to make sure that the pieces are touching because solder doesn't like to fill. You can do it, but it doesn't like to do it. Okay, it's not so easy, so it's got to be touching. Rule number 3, you have to heat the piece evenly. So if you see, a lot of times I'm moving the heat and heating everything nice and even and getting it nice and hot because we're basically silver soldering. So if we were like gold soldering, you can hold the heat in one place and not have to move it. Like if this was a ring, you have to with silver you have to heat the whole thing and then the joint, and if it's gold you can just put the heat right there at the joint and it would work. Okay, because of how gold and silver conducts heat. So the 3 rules: it's got to be clean, it's got to be touching, and you got to heat evenly. Okay, then also the question has come up quite a bit: what is the difference between fusing and soldering? Well, the difference is fusing does not require solder. I already explained what solder was, and solder uses solder. So what fusing is you're asking two pieces of metal to come together with heat. So I always like to explain it like 2 pats of butter. So if you imagine 2 pats of butter in a pan and you heat it and it melts and they come towards each other, and when it cools it becomes one piece. Well, that is one fused piece of butter. And basically, if you have 2 pieces of wire and you heat the whole thing, right? And it's got to be touching or else it won't find each other. This isn't butter, so it's not going to just flow into each other. So it's got to be touching. So you heat both pieces, and when it comes right to that melting temp, or right to just about melting, they find each other and boom, it's fused. That's fusing. A lot of people will also tell you you cannot fuse alloyed metals. Let me tell you, untrue. It's not easy, but you can do it because if you think about it, we're taking this down to a melting point. And if you can get it to melt, it's going to fuse. It might not be pretty, but it's going to fuse. So let's not argue that. The other thing too is if you're going to fuse alloyed metals, you're really going to want to use like an acetylene or propane torch. That will make it a lot better, okay? Or make it a lot easier. So the difference between fusing and soldering is fusing does not require solder. Soldering requires the solder, okay? So, different types of solder. Paste, okay? So what we typically use in my classes is paste because it's easier, I find, for most people, and it has the flux already built into it, which means you don't need flux to make the solder work. What is flux in relation to solder? Flux helps prime the metal and helps the solder flow. Okay, without it, the solder will not flow and will not do its job. So then the question always comes, why do I have flux in my solder kits with solder paste? Because the truth is, if you heat this incorrectly and you burn off all of the flux, you're going to have to put the flux back in. So let's just say you're sitting there working happily along and all of a sudden you've burned off all the flux, your solder won't move, it won't flow. You're stuck for a week before you get that flux ordered in. So that's why I think flux is important to always have around on your desk. Okay, so solder also comes in wire, like so. and it comes in sheet. And it literally looks like a piece of sheet metal. Now these two products, like that, these two products require flux. So paste does not require flux, but sheet, chip, and wire does require flux. I didn't mention chip. What is chip? Basically, it's the sheet cut down to little tiny pallions, or also known as chips. Okay? So here's a trick for you also, is if you're using sheet, what I would do is I would marker all of my sheet and color code it. So hard solder always gets red, medium solder gets nothing, and easy solder for me always is green. Okay, because what happens when I'm using sheet and I cut it down, if the pallion or the chip goes flying, you're never going to remember what chip that is, or you and I all know that there's chips all over our solder board, and at some point you're going to be like, huh, I wonder what that is. You're not going to know, but if it's color coded, you'll always know. And I've gone so far as, I know this is the anal retentive in me here, I'm going to show you. I have color coded my container also, so that I always know what it is. Okay. Another thing too is your wire. You need to mark your wire too, so that or your solder wire, so that you don't mix it up between your regular wire and your solder, because the day that you mix that up is going to be a bad day. Been there, done that. So you want to make sure that you keep track of what all your wire solder is going and what it looks like. So a question regarding the flux, is one beneficial over the other? I'm going to say no. My experience is it's all the same. Okay, it's just a matter of preference. That's what it boils down to. And it's really, yeah, some people just really don't like the green brazing flux, as they say it gets all over the place, while other people will say the paste is just painful because it's paste. So everybody's got an argument either way. I actually have both here, because when I first started, I bought like everything like everybody else, and just trying to figure out what I like, and I ended up still with the green stuff because it was easier. Okay. So, okay, different ways to solder. Okay, so there is pick soldering, there's stick soldering, there's chips, there's paste. So I'm going to move the camera again, and I'm going to show you how to pick solder and then stick solder. Okay. Okay. So here. So the question, I'm going to get back to that really quick, is about this texture. Honestly, it's so funny. I pulled this out of my scrap pile. This is a sand dollar. I have no idea where I got this from. So I wish I can help you, but I can't. So here, the stick soldering, or I'm sorry, pick soldering. I just flattened that a little bit, and I'm going to solder this ring to this bottom. And to stick solder, you're going to need a solder pick, and you're going to pull out a little bit of solder. Okay, so a lot of times when I'm pick soldering, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hammer this piece of solder out so that it's flat and doesn't roll away from me. Okay, I'm going to cut a couple pieces, and I'm going to hammer it over here on the bench block just to flatten it out so it doesn't roll away when I go to heat it up. Okay, I'm just going to do two pieces. I think you can see that there. Oops. Okay, you're going to need to flux this. So I'm going to put a couple drops inside. Oops, a little too much, but that's okay. And then here's the key to pick soldering. When I learned this, it changed everything for me, because I always felt that pick soldering was so hard to understand and took so much skill. It's about steady hands more than anything. So what is the trick here with pick soldering? The trick is identifying the flux. Okay, so you don't want to put these pieces on until the flux crystallizes. That's the indicator that this is hot enough. So what I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to pick some solder. So I'm going to heat my piece of solder here until, and I have my solder pick close. So until the solder balls up, I'm just going to heat it right there. Hello. Okay, why are we not balling today? Sort of weird. Oops. Okay, so there it is. It's starting to ball up, and right when it balls up, I'm going to grab it. See? So while it is hot, I grab it. And then I'm going to go over to my piece, and I'm going to heat it. So it's nice to have this rotating board. See that? It's starting to turn white, right? The flux is starting to turn white, and it's just about to turn crystal. I'm going to hold my pick close, and then I'm going to heat the inside too. It's a fairly large piece, and right when it's hot enough, I put it down. It touches and sticks, and voila, there it is. It just sucked it right in. So that's how you pick solder. Okay, and what is the advantage of pick soldering is that it's really direct, and it keeps everything really nice and neat. All right, so let me do that one more time. Yes, we do have, ooh, and it rolled away. Yes, we do have soldering stations available. I did provide a link for it. Okay, so I lost that piece of solder right in there. Okay, I'm going to cut another piece. Do a second one for you here. Oops. So much for keeping that from rolling away. Just to let you know, we do have complete solder kits available on the website. The link is in the description. There we go. Okay, so again, you're going to have to get everybody happy hot again. The flux has already crystallized, but you'll see it. You'll see how it gets hot and it sort of moves again. And I bring in my pick to help keep it warm and get the solder warm. And there, it just grabbed it. Don't think you guys could see that, but it did just grab it, and it's just flowing right along the edges. Okay? Okay. So the next one, I'm going to apply a little bit more flux on this piece because I know it only soldered a little bit on the one side. And I'm going to show you how to stick solder. For me, I don't like to hold the entire coil in my hand. A lot of people do that. I really prefer to cut a piece because I feel like I can control it a little bit better. I like to cut a little piece, and I like to hold it like so with my fire tweezers. I find it to be a little bit easier. Okay, because I also find that if I have the entire coil, next thing you know, I have completely over soldered. It becomes a hot mess, and all my solder has melted and flowed throughout my piece. Okay, so I'm going to heat this in the middle, on the side, get everybody nice, happy, hot. I added a little bit more flux. I'm going to wait and watch to see that flux starts to crystallize, and then I'm going to touch it down, just like that, on the inside. Okay, I think I cut my piece a little too short, but there. So you just touch it right in the joint, and boom. It grabbed it, and now it's moving all around the edges. I doubt that you can see that, but there it is. You can see it right around the edges, right there. Okay. So that's stick soldering. My quench bowl's on the side here. Okay. Oh, the quench bowl. Your quench bowl really shouldn't be plastic. It should be metal, or glass is not bad either, or ceramic's not bad. But there's our piece. Okay. Okay. So now let's go uh, to what are we calling this? I can't think. Oh, um, when you solder sweat soldering. When you solder two pieces, flat pieces together. So here I've got a piece of copper. This is all, of course, I'm using copper because I'm cheap, but you can definitely, this is all very applicable to silver. And this is my other flat piece that I'm going to solder down. I'm going to dry flux this. A lot of people don't teach dry fluxing, but I think it's an easy technique that everybody should just know. So dry fluxing is simply the process of heating the metal with the flux until the flux dries. Because if you have a tiny little chip here, right, it's going to bubble right off. And so we're going to dry this. You see that? Nice and dry so that it doesn't bubble up anymore. And then I'm going to grab a few chips. This is where fine tweezers is really great. So here's some chip. Okay. And another piece just because. Okay, can you see that? And then you could, if you wanted to, just put this piece directly on there. But it has potential of moving and getting sloppy, so this is why we do it this way. We're going to heat this piece until the solder flows. Okay. So we're going to heat it, heat it, heat it. And that's flux coming up there. Why, there it is. Okay, so there. So there's the there's a solder. It has flowed. You're going to quench this, you're going to pickle it, and then we do it again. So does anybody have questions so far? Not yet? Too shy? Okay. So to the person asking about the solder station, just to let you know, the solder station does not come with the board, so make sure you order a board to go with it too if you don't already have a board. We sort of chose to do it that way because most of our customers already have a board, and I thought it was a bit redundant. Okay, so I have pickled this on the side, and I'm going to dry it off. Not a great pickle job, I'm going with it because it's just a demo. And I'm going to put a little bit more flux on there, just a tiny little bit, because it should have washed off. Okay, and I'm going to dry flux that again. The solder is on there already, so I'm drying that so that it doesn't bubble up. And then now I'm going to solder these two pieces together. So it's sort of tricky, oops, in that the how do you know when it's flowed? Well, you can actually see the two pieces sort of like suck together, and it's sort of magical actually when this happens, and I sort of do love it. But the two pieces do just sort of do this kind of thing and stick together, and there it is. That is sweat soldering. Oops. There we go. Okay. Okay. See? Where it did solder, it's stuck. I didn't get the solder to flow all the way down, but that's okay. You can heat it some more and ask the solder to flow, or there just wasn't enough solder for that. Okay. Set that aside. All right. So that's how you use chip. If you were doing, say, let's just for argument's sake, if you were doing this ring down to this flat piece, Then you would put flux in there, dry flux it, and place little chips on the inside or outside, depending on what you're doing, um, to work with the chip. Okay? So now, where's the advantage of paste solder? Okay. So if we were doing a jump ring, and this is well bigger than a jump ring, but I wanted to use something a little bit bigger, knowing how challenged we are on these videos to see it. So if this was a jump ring and you wanted to solder that, can you imagine putting a little tiny chip on there and praying that it stays together? Yeah, I didn't think so. So what makes life a lot easier is to use chip, okay? And I'm working this a little bit harder because it's not together. Remember, all your joints need to be together. Okay, and I'm going to take a pin as my applicator. So a lot of times these tubes of solder paste, they come with these syringe tops. We don't, if you buy solder paste from the Urban Beater, we don't supply you with the syringe tops. Why? Because they are a waste. What happens is it gets clogged up and then it dries out, and you're going to have all of this waste and you can't use the tip. You're going to have to spend more time cleaning this tip than working. So I find it a lot easier just to use a pin or a toothpick or even a wire to apply it, and it works just fine. Okay, so actually I'm going to move the camera again and show you. You can use the pumice bowl for this, but the thing is, let's see if I can get this. The thing is, it's so small. Now, for this piece, it's not so small, but for a jump ring, it's too small for the pumice bowl. You're just going to lose it in the pumice, right? So I'm moving this over so you know you can hardly see that, but it's about position. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just hold my jump ring like this, and I'm going to heat it like so. Okay, and I needed to move the camera so I didn't melt it. So, and I'm just going to hold it right on the joint, because remember, if you're doing jump rings, they're tiny, and watch for it to flow. That's it. Okay, so let me give you a comparison. So this is, we'll say, a baby ring, like a pinky ring. Okay, so absolutely this would be great in a bowl of pumice. But if you're making, again, just to give you a comparison, this is, can you see that? That's a jump ring. See how small that is? Okay, and I'm going to show you, we're going to move the camera one more time. Oh, ow, ow. Okay, so there's the pumice. You see how small it is? That's why I wouldn't use the pumice bowl for jump rings. It just doesn't make sense. Whereas if I was using a ring, yeah, absolutely. It's a great use to solder that ring. Okay? Okay. So, filling in gaps. What do we do? What if you had a gap? Well, it's really that's really fickle business. Okay, solder paste doesn't like filling in gaps. It doesn't bridge very easily. So I would say this is a case where you would want to have like solder wire, because solder wire is a little beefier and it does have a tendency to fill a lot easier. Now this week someone reached out to me and gave me a trick that I have not had time to test, but I'm going to share it with you. So the trick was to take easy solder paste and hard solder paste and mix them together and put it in the gap and then heat it up, because the theory is that the easy solder paste would flow before the hard solder paste, and the hard solder paste will sit there and be that bulk that you need to fill the gap. Supposedly it works really well. So, you know, if any of you guys try it, do let me know, and how that works out. Okay, let's think. What other questions? What other questions do you have? Oh, levels of solder. Okay, so solder comes in a whole bunch of different levels. It comes in IT, hard, easy. I'm sorry, IT, hard, medium, easy, extra easy. Okay, IT is intense heat solder. It is used only for fine silver. Most people don't even have never ever heard of it, and I'm gonna tell you, since we're sitting here on the internet, don't don't Google IT solder because you're gonna get it solder and it's not gonna do anything for you. But it's also known as eutectic solder. Okay. Then so we have hard, medium, and easy. So at every level of solder, the silver content goes down, which means the melting content goes down, which means that the reason why we use those levels is so that we don't melt the previous joint open. Okay, so if you're doing something like this, okay, so it's a bezel, right? So the first joint is the bezel. You're going to use hard, and then that bezel gets soldered down to a back plate. So that is medium, and then this whole unit gets soldered to the ring. There you're going to use easy. So different levels. Question always comes up regarding re question always comes up regarding copper solder, and everybody wants levels, different levels of copper solder. Truth is, with copper solder paste, there are no levels because it's self-leveling. Okay, so every time you heat it, the first joint takes more heat than that second joint. Okay, so it is self-leveling, which makes it sort of nice. I sort of wish silver would do that. That would just make my life a lot easier. So the question is, with the combination of the hard and easy solder when to fill, how would that affect the color in patina? You know, I would say it doesn't, because the colors should be pretty darn close to the eye, and you shouldn't be able to detect a difference in color. Okay, and actually that brings me to, which solder do you use with which metal when you are using mixed or when you're making a mixed metal project. So say you have a copper project that you have some silver embellishments, or you have a silver project with copper embellishments. So my question always is, which one is greater, has more mass? So let's just say here, you ha so here you have copper and copper. Okay, so of course we're going to use copper solder. But what if you had a copper back and a silver bezel? Okay, do you use silver solder or do you use copper solder? This one is sort of argumentative, but my question is, what do you want to clean up? So if you use silver solder and it bleeds onto this copper, you're going to have to clean all that silver solder off. You're going to see more of that. So my preference would be, I would use copper solder on that. But if the back plate is silver and the ring or the bezel is copper, I would use silver solder, because the likelihood of my silver bleeding onto my silver is greater. So it's going to be a lot less noticeable and a little bit cleaner. So then I know that I bumped into several people who have told me that they've been taught to only use silver solder on copper. Sorry, but I'm going to call that one out here. Why? That doesn't make sense. It's sort of like this. It's sort of like saying you should only use gold solder on silver. Makes no sense whatsoever. It's about it's about color, it's about cost, right? Because why would you use silver on copper and always have a silver line? If you were to use copper solder, at least it will patina to a darker color, so it would disappear over time. And I do realize that copper solder does have a nickel pewter look when you're using it. So, but that's really the case there. It's just, it doesn't really make that much sense. So another question is, what about the solder you're getting from the hardware store? Okay, so first of all, the the silver solder that you get from the hardware store, I would never use that because if you actually looked at the label, it usually says 5% silver. And do you really want to use that on your fine metals? I say just super glue it at that point, right? It's a thing. Now, regarding the copper solder from the hardware store, honestly, I don't know. I'm guessing that a lot of that stuff has lead in it, so you have to be really careful. That's one. Two, another thing is that they have a tendency to be really soft, meaning they flow. The flow temp is really low. You can actually a lot of the solder that they use for piping, right? In your plumbing, you can actually get it to flow with a lighter. So it's really soft. So you have to be sort of careful with that. As far as so those would be my only precautions. If it doesn't have lead in it, why not? And just be careful not to overheat. That's the other thing. Outside of that, I don't really see a problem in using copper solder from the hardware store. Okay, so I'm going to ask Andy to repeat that question. Okay, so the question is copper solder has a tendency to be difficult, um, is the opinion of some instructors. And what is my opinion? I'm going to agree. I hate copper soldering. It gets everywhere. It is just a hot mess. Okay, so if you're going back and forth between copper solder and silver solder, okay, paste. But heck, even the wire stuff, heck. So you need like, if you think you're using a tiny little bit of silver solder, you need like half of that for copper because it just flows and goes everywhere. So yeah, for me it's really messy but overall, I don't like working with copper. I just demo in copper, and back to what has been happening the last couple of weeks. Remember week 1? I threw this together like 4 or 5 days before we started and didn't have most of this material, so it was just working with what I had, and let's be honest, being cheap about it, but hey, it worked. Okay. And if you're noticing things are changing and you're starting to see more silver projects out of me here. Speaking of which, so Friday we've got the totally molecular. There's a few kits left if you're interested. And next week we have flower power, which has been all posted here on the QTalk Facebook page. So flower power, I think I have maybe 4 or 5 kits left. Some of you guys have been sort of sneaky, and I'm looking for my projects here, sorry. Some of you guys have been sort of sneaky, and you're finding that I'm posting these on the website before I announce it, and you're gobbling up the kits. But that's okay, yay us, right? So the totally molecular is this one on Saturday. Okay. Somebody asked once again, what is in our solder kit? It is $100. You get a torch, pickle, meaning Sparex, copper tweezers, fire tweezers, solder board, tripod, 1 tube of solder paste, and flux. That link is on the description here. Okay, so that's what we have coming up. I'm still looking for ideas for next week's demo Wednesday. I feel like I'm going to start calling it Wine with Me Wednesday because I think we're going to start drinking a happy hour here or something. Pajama day on Friday with Totally Molecular next, and then on Monday we have the Spring Ring, which is simply 16 gauge and 18 gauge wire to make that project. So most of you guys should already have it. I did add copper wire and 16 gauge and 18 gauge copper wire onto the website because a lot of you have been asking for it. Okay, so wrapping this up, thank you so much for being here. Please, please, please share this video. Please consider hitting our website, theurbanbeater.com, and picking up a instruction sheet or two to help contribute to what we're doing. Because as some of you guys know, and I know many of you guys are missing out on these shows that have been canceled, that's our livelihood has gone to pot. But we are working and we're trying really hard to get things rolling here by doing these Q Talk lives. I'm glad you guys are enjoying it. Oh, another thing is we are fielding out Zoom. I will be doing my first test tomorrow for a very small group of people, and I will report back on Friday as to how it went. But I think that this is a very viable option and way to go. So if you have any input, please reach out to me. Let me know what your thoughts are. And as soon as I figure out how to download these videos will also go on YouTube. And as soon as I figure out Twitch, it will go on Twitch also, just to give everybody an opportunity and places to find these videos. Thank you so much for the feedback. I've heard a lot of feedback. I'm shocked. Yay! We're doing an okay job. Yay! And thank you for that because that's, you guys know I'm my worst critic. And so it's great to hear. All right. It's a sunny day here in Ohio. The weather's great. I think it's in the upper 50s. At least it feels like it. The windows are open. Thank goodness no one's making noise outside. I'm going to go enjoy it. Send us messages and let us know what you need and what you think. And oh, and again, I need ideas for next Wednesday would be great. So please send them forward. All right. Have a great day, everyone.